Hi everybody, and welcome back to my Disney mini album tutorial. Now in the last video we built the base of the album, but I actually forgot to add the pieces on the inside to finish. So we're going to do that first, and then we're going to start building the interactive elements on our pages. The first piece I have measures 3 inches by just slightly less than 8.5 inches. You can cut this to 8 3/8 if you want an exact measurement. And I'm going to be placing this here to cover up this section of my spine. So I'm just going to apply adhesive to that entire piece and then make sure that it is centered over the spine. And then I'm going to let that dry really well before I burnish it down into those cracks, before I fold the album, into those cracks. I am going to burnish it down, but I want to make sure that it's adhered before I close my album and fold it up so that that paper doesn't shift. So when I put this piece on, I am just lining it up basically with the edge of that score line over here, or that edge of the paper on that side. Now I typically would have put these pieces on before I attached my top and bottom panels, but I wasn't even thinking about it whenever I did this part of the tutorial before, so I'm going to go ahead and do it now. It will not hurt anything, it's just adding paper in a slightly different way. So this would have been underneath here, so it wouldn't have been quite as lumpy, but it'll still work. I'm just going to smooth that down to make sure that it's as flat as I can get it. And then for the other side, I have a piece that's 2 3/4 by about 8 3/8, and I'm going to adhere this piece down to this side. Now I'm going to cover this piece here. So I have my piece that measures about 10 7/8 by 1.5, and I'm going to be placing this on here to cover this spine section. Now for the last piece, I have a part for up here. It is 10 7/8 by 2 inches, and I'm going to be placing this one here. Now my desk, I have something on it, so this is not sitting flat. I am going to have this sitting flat when I put this piece on here, but I need to move stuff, and I'll be doing this off camera. Now that I have all of my pieces on, forgive this for being slightly uphill. The other album is sitting there and I just don't have enough room on my desk. I'm gonna start with this one since it is already adhered down and dry. I don't wanna start with the last one I did, but I need to get this folded so that it'll fit on my desk better. I'm going to take my bone folder in here in my crease, and I'm just going to slowly bend up on this cover to form that book shape. Then I'm going to bend down again, and I'm just going to smooth this down into this crease. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this second one here. Taking my bone folder and creasing it into that fold, and then folding up. Then I'm going to move over and do this one. And then I will do the second fold on this side. And then the bottom fold. And then the second one. And then finally, this top one, and I'm going to do it in the opposite direction just because I don't have room right now on my table. If you have enough room to spread out and do this somewhere, I would recommend that. I should have cleaned my desk off a little bit better, but it's fine. And then we're gonna do this one. You just want to take your time and you don't want to press too hard where your bone folder goes through the paper. I've done that before and it is not fun. So you just want to be careful. And now we should be able to fold all these back in. And that is the base of the album. So now we're going to go ahead and come inside here and we're going to start with the elements for the inside front cover. My first piece for my inside front cover measures 4.5 by 9.25. On the 9.25 inch side, I've scored it 1/2 and 8 3/4 of an inch. I like to miter the ends on my 1/2 inch tabs because I think it makes it easier for things to slide in and out. If you don't like to do that, you don't have to, but I do prefer to do that, so you will see all of the ends on my pieces mitered. I'm going to go ahead and fold on both of those score lines and burnish these down so that they're nice and crisp and flat. Now I'm going to be placing this here in the center of my page. So this is actually going to be, so this piece, is 8.5, this piece is 8.25, so it is smaller than the actual page itself. If you do not like that, you can cut this to 9.5 and then you would have it the same exact size. Now, typically you would have done that actually. When I measured this album here, it wasn't that way, so that's what I'm going with. I did make some modifications on a couple of the pieces, but for the most part, a lot of the elements are the same exact size as in the album. So I have my piece already measured where the 1/2 is, and I'm just going to, or where the center is, I'm sorry, and I'm going to just set this on the center of my page. And once it's centered, I'll go ahead and burnish this down. Now the other thing for this page is just that really large insert booklet. So I have the back piece, it's 11 by 8. It is scored at 1/2 inch on the 11 inch side. And I am going to just fold on this score line. I did not miter the corners here. I completely forgot. So I'm going to do that now. And I'm just going to slightly miter these ones, because this is going to be a booklet. I don't want them to be super mitered because I am going to adhere the front piece onto this. My front piece is 10.5 by 8 inches, and I'm just going to adhere this down here right onto the front. Once I have my booklet, I am just going to place it in here right underneath my belly band. And then I'm going to come in here on the front side of the right-hand page. Now for this piece, I have 6 by 7.5. On the 7.5 inch side, I've scored it 1/2 inch and 5/8 of an inch. And I am going to fold on both of my score lines. Now I only mitered the ends on the 1/2 inch section. I didn't miter all the way down to that 5/8 inch mark. This is just going to give me a little bit of extra room underneath that flap because I am going to have things built up on the page and I want the flap to close properly. So for right now, I'm just going to fold onto that 1/2 inch score line, and I'll apply my adhesive to that score line or to that 1/2 inch tab section only, not applying my adhesive to that 5/8 inch piece. And then I'm going to adhere this to the center of my page. I have already marked that on the center. So I'm just going to line that edge up with the top of my page. And then burnish this down. And I'm going to flip this around so that I can see it without putting my head in the frame. Once that piece is on, I'll go ahead and flip that 1/8 inch piece up so that it is straight and it gives me that extra space underneath that flap. Now for the next piece, it is 7 inches by 1 3/4. On the 7-inch side, I've scored 1/2 and 6 and 6 1/2. And I'm going to fold on both score lines. And this is going to be the belly band closure piece for the page. Now I'm actually going to put this down towards the bottom. I'm not going to have this in the center. That way my photo mat that I place in there that locks the page closed will fit correctly. So I will just add this, and I'm just eyeing this. I'm not measuring it. I'm going to just add it here and then adhere this down to my page. Once the belly band is on, we're going to lift up. The next piece measures 11 by 6 1/2. Let me do it this. It's 11 by 6 1/2. I've scored it 1/2 inch on the 6 1/2 inch side, and I fold it up here. And this is going to go down here on the bottom of this flap. Now in my original album, I used a decorative punch on a lot of these edges. If you want to do that, I would recommend doing it now before you adhere these pieces into the album. It's much easier than going back in later and adhering them down, and then punching the pieces. I'm not going to be adding a decorative edge, but if you want to, like I said, do it now and then adhere this piece down to this bottom edge of the page. The next piece measures 11 by 3. On the 3-inch side, I've scored at 1/2 inch. Again, I'm going to fold on the score line, and then I'm going to adhere this piece down right on top of the larger flap. Now again, if you want to add a decorative edge, I would go ahead and do it now before adhering this piece down. Now my next piece measures 6 by 1 3/4. On the 1 3/4 inch side, I've scored at 1/2 inch and folded on my score line. I've folded my top flap down to put this one on. This piece is going to go down here, and these sides are going to line up with the sides on this flap. You can also measure to find your center as well, but ultimately you want to make sure that the sides on both of these flaps are lined up that way that it looks neater than if something is slightly off center and one is centered. Now I'm going to open this side up. I'm going to close this side so that it will fit on my desk. We're going to come in here to the back side or the inside of the page and work on it next. Now the first piece I have measures 6 3/8 by 8 1/2. On the 6 3/8 inch side, I've scored each edge at 1/2 inch. So this is at 1/2 inch and 5 7/8. Then I've turned and I've scored on the 8 1/2 inch side at 1/2 inch. I have mitered through the bottom 2 corners to remove that excess paper as well. And we're going to fold on these score lines to create a pocket. Now with this pocket, the opening is going to be at the top. We're going to bring this down here, and I'm going to leave about 1/8 of an inch on the right side and on the bottom, and I'm going to adhere this down to the page. The next piece I have measures 5 3/8 by 2 1/2. On the 2 1/2 inch side, I've scored at 1/2 inch, and I'm going to fold on this score line. This piece I'm going to set over here, just like this. I'm going to leave a small space between my pieces, and then I'm going to line up that bottom edge with the bottom edge of this pocket. Now this piece is going to be about, I think it's a little bit more than 1/8 of an inch. Let me see when I place it back on my page. Yep, it's a little tiny bit more than 1/8 of an inch over here, and that's okay. It's not too much, but it's not completely even with the other side either. And I could take and add more space here, or I could have bumped this over more, but you're not going to notice it once those elements are on the page. Next, I'm going to build the insert that's going to go down in here. So I have first piece is 5 1/4 by 7 3/4. On the 7 3/4 inch side, I've scored it 1/2 inch. I'm going to fold on this score line here. And then the next piece measures 5 1/4 by 8 inches, and I'm going to adhere this to that top piece here. Now you notice I flipped it around, that way the back sides are the same and then the insides are those smooth yellow papers. Now if you have plain cardstock that's not textured, you don't have to worry about that, but if you're using textured cardstock, you want to keep consistent throughout the album. And now mine is a little tighter than I would like it to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this over to my paper trimmer and just slightly trim this. It shouldn't actually be a problem because this is 6 3/8. So this should be 5 3/8 and this is 5 1/4. This is a little more than 5 1/4, that's why. So I'm just going to slightly trim mine so that it fits more smoothly down into my pot. Now, before I can put my waterfall flaps on, I need to cover this so you don't see this back. You can add a piece of decorative paper here if you have your decorative papers already and you know what you want to do, but I don't, so I have a piece here and it measures 5 1/2 by 8 inches, and I am going to be placing this here so that it fits just like this at the top of this paper here. You want it to just be at the edge of that and down into here. And now I'm going to go ahead and retrim mine just slightly because I don't want to see it from this pocket, or it might just be something is slightly crooked on the page. So if I move this, if I turn it around, this side, it will actually lay straight. So I'm going to do it this way, but you don't want it to be sticking out here and you want it to be right up against this pocket so you don't see anything from that chipboard cover. Next, I have 4 waterfall flaps. They are 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. On the 5 1/2 inch side, I have scored it 1/2 inch. I'm going to fold on these score lines, but these are the only pieces that I did not miter. I keep them straight because the piece of paper that I put in there is going to be straight too. And just a personal preference because I think it's easier to line up the waterfall flaps when the ends are straight instead of when they're mitered in. Now I am going to be centering my flaps here. I have some marks up here. Now you can do this one of 2 ways. You can place this all the way down in the pocket if you like it there. I am going to have mine up here, so when I put the magnetic closure on this piece, this is going to be up here, so there's about 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to have this be about 1/8 of an inch from the top edge as well. So when I adhere this down, it's going to be centered. There is going to be a space here and here that's smaller than this pocket here. So to start your waterfall, you're going to apply your adhesive to one of those pieces first, and then place that on the page. Again, making sure that it is lined up, and I need to lift this up to make sure that it is straight. Otherwise, the whole thing will be crooked on the page. You can always measure multiple places and draw a vertical line down your page and then line up the edges of your flap if you are afraid of it going crooked on the page. But once I get my first one on, as long as it's straight, then when I take the next flap, I'm going to apply my adhesive here, and then I'm just going to use that first flap to line up the next ones. So I'm going to just put that score line right up against the edge of that paper. I'm going to fold this, and then I'm going to pull this until it is straight. Those ends are straight, which means that this is slightly shifted in here, so it's not completely up against that edge, and that's okay. There's going to be paper covering it. I would rather my flaps down here are going to be straight. So then I'm going to open up both of those ones, apply my adhesive now to that third piece, placing that down, closing my flaps, lining them up, and then burnishing this down. Now I'm going to open this one. Oh, we got some glue seeping out of that one. I'm going to take my 4th flap and apply my adhesive. Now on this one, it's actually going to go on top of the pocket slightly, so that is normal, just be prepared. I'm going to place this here, close my flaps to straighten everything out, and then burnish this down. Now when I did my original album, I put my waterfall down on the page a little bit further, so it actually went further onto the pocket than this one. It's just barely catching here. If you wanted to, you could apply additional waterfall flaps down here if you chose to do so, and you would just have a smaller pocket. So that is something you could add, probably 3 more if you wanted to add additional photo spaces. Then the next piece, it's 3 inches by 8.5 inches. It's scored at 1/2 inch on the 8.5 inch side. This is going to be the closure band for the piece. And it's going to go this direction and catch here on that pocket. Now, a lot of times I will have my closure go this direction here, but in this album, I have it here, and it's actually adhered down to the front of that waterfall flap for whatever reason. I don't know what I'm gonna end up doing with this one, so I'm just going to adhere this down and then leave it for now. So I am just adding my ruler in here because I didn't mark this in the center. I just need to go ahead and quickly get this there using the score line on the top waterfall flap to line up the score line on this piece. And then I'm just adhering this down, and then I'll flip up to make sure that this is on here, just like that. That is all for this side. So next we're going to come in here, open back up, and we're going to work on the front of the upper page next. The first piece I have measures 7 inches by 8 7/8. On the 8 7/8 inch side, I scored it 1/2 and 5/8, and I've mitered the ends only on the 1/2 inch tab section, and then I folded on those score lines. Now I'm going to take this and apply my adhesive only to my 1/2 inch tab section, not the 5/8 inch section. And this I'm going to adhere to the center of this flap at the top. And once it's on, I can pop up that 1/8 of an inch to give it extra space underneath of here. And then I'm going to flip up and the next piece measures 11 inches by 6 1/4. On the 6 1/4 inch side, I've scored it 1/2 inch. And now this piece I'm going to apply down here. And again, if you are using your decorative edge die, you will want to cut this now, or your punch, you want to cut it now before you put this pocket on. Now for this next piece, it's going to be a little tricky. I've got 2 pieces. They measure 4 3/4 by 8 inches. On the 4 3/4 inch side, I've scored it 1/2 inch. I'm going to take one of these and place it here in the center. So there's going to be an 1/8 of an inch on top and bottom. That is, the larger flap is smaller than this flap is smaller than the flap we're putting it on. So there's going to be an 1/8 of an inch. Then I'm going to put this one here, lining up the top and bottom edges, making sure they're even. Okay, once those 2 pieces are on, I'm going to just carefully fold those in, and now I'm going to fold this and this in so that I can bring this part of my page in here, and we're going to work on this inside part of the upper flap. I have two pieces that are 6 inches by 8.5. On the 6-inch side, I've scored at 1/2 inch. And these pieces are going to go on each side and meet in the middle. So I'm going to put my first piece on, and I'm going to make sure that it does not go into this score line, because if it does, it will continue to crease in there and get bent while the page is opening and closing, and it will continue to catch and be a problem. So I'm going to apply my adhesive, and I'll show you how I put pages on when they're this size. If you don't trust yourself, you just cut this 1/8 of an inch smaller, but I lift up on my page so that I know where that gap is. Then I line up this top edge and the side perfectly. And now I'm going to set this page down and holding it in place so it doesn't shift at all. I'm going to burnish this down. Then I'm going to make sure that it stayed in place, and it did. And then you can come in here and burnish on the inside too. And now I'm going to take my second piece and I'm going to place it here on my page. I need to make sure that it meets in the middle, but there's no overlap. Now mine has a really small gap, and that is perfectly fine. I just don't want there to be any overlap. So even if it's overlapping just slightly, we do not want that to happen. So for this piece, I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the previous one so that it doesn't get in that bottom fold, but I also need to be careful of that center section. So I'm going to line this up on my page. And now I also have the top and bottom edge of this piece that I can line everything up. So once it's on, again, I'm going to double check, make sure it's okay, and then I will hold it into place as I burnish it down. Now for the next piece, it measures 11 inches by 4 inches. On the 4-inch side, I've scored this at 1/2 inch. This is going to be on the bottom. Then I've measured over here from the left corner 1 3/4 of an inch. And then up from the bottom, from the score line, not from the bottom of the edge, from the score line, up 1 3/4 of an inch. Now I'm going to draw a line from here to here. And this is where I am going to cut to create that diagonal pocket. Once I cut mine, I decided it wasn't slanted enough for me, so I measured down over here 1/4 of an inch, and then I recut this. I left this at 1 3/4, but this is now 1 1/2. And once I have this on, I'm going to go ahead and fold on this score line here, and then bring my piece back in. Now I'm going to open these up, and this pocket is going to go down here at the base of my page, making sure I don't go too far down so that it's in that fold. I want to make sure that it's not. And I also need to make sure that my pieces here will close side to side. So it's a little too long, so I'm going to slightly trim. And if you don't trust yourself to do this with scissors, just put this in your scoreboard and cut off a little tiny sliver, or however much you need for this to fit in here, and have both of your flaps close properly. So I'm going to go ahead and adhere this down, and again, being very careful that I don't get it into that fold here so that my page will actually close correctly. Now for the next piece, it measures 11 inches by 3.5. I did the same thing, but on the opposite side. I've measured 1 3/4, 1.5, drew my line, and then I cut it. Now for this piece, I'm going to be adhering this piece down. Actually, I'm not going to adhere it down yet. I need to have my decorative paper down first because I'm just going to adhere this side and this side down here at the bottom. And then it's still going to catch on this one because it's going to be behind this piece here. So we have that double diagonal pocket. For now, I'm just going to leave this piece in here, and then I'm going to close these pieces. Now I'm going to lift this whole album up so I can get this into the frame again. We're going to open these pieces up, and we're going to come in here and start building the bottom page. The first piece is 6.5 by 9.5. On the 9.5 inch side, I've scored it 1/2 and 9 inches. Now folding on both of these score lines, I have a pocket now that's going to go on to this piece. So this piece measures Now the first piece I have measures 6.5 by 8 3/4. On the 8 3/4 inch side, I've scored it 1/2 inch. And I'm going to adhere this flap over here on the left side of the page. I'm going to leave a small border here, but I am going to leave room here for a feature to go on, like a little pocket or something later. So I haven't decided yet. This is where I had a little library pocket from the paper collection that I was using on my first album, so I designed this page for that. I don't know what I'm going to do on this one, but I'm going to do something similar. So I'm going to leave about 1/2 inch from the left edge, and then I'm going to apply this flap and lining up the top edge, or the score line with the top edge of the page, and then burnishing this down. My next piece measures 6 inches by 9 1/4. On the 9 1/4 inch side, I've scored it 1/2 and 8 3/4. I'm going to fold on these two, and I'm going to place this piece here on the left side of this flap. Now this is slightly different from the other album. I did this because I don't like the way that other one is. You can't tell if this is a pocket and the whole piece slides out. So this will make it easier because the next piece is going to go into the pocket, and there'll be that difference here. So what I'm going to do on this one, I'm going to apply my adhesive to my 1/2 inch tabs, but I am also at the same time going to apply adhesive down the left side of my piece here to close this off. So I'm going to take my adhesive and put a very thin line right down this edge. And then I'm going to take this and set this right here on the edge, lining up the left edge, the top and the bottom edges. And once those are all lined up, I'll go ahead and burnish this down. So now I have my opening here for my pocket, and then this side is closed. Then for the next piece, I have it cut to 11 inches by 6 1/4, and this is scored, I actually scored it this way, and I'm pretty sure it's scored at 5 inches, or maybe it's 5 1/4. It's 5 1/4, so I scored it 5 1/4 inches, and I'm just going to fold this here to make my booklet, and I'm going to place this here right in that pocket. So now you'll be able to tell if that's a pocket and that this is removable. For now, so that this doesn't get folded, I'm just going to tuck it all the way in there for safekeeping. And then I'm going to flip over to the inside. Now I'm going to take these again. Actually, I'm going to take this one first, and then this one, and we're going to work on the inside bottom panel. The first piece measures 8.5 by 9 1/4. I have this scored at 1/2 and 8 3/4 on the 9 1/4 inch side. I'm not sure why I didn't make this 9.5 so that this would fit the entire piece. Again, I'm going off of the measurements from my previous album. So this one is going to have a slight border here between the bottom edge and the top edge, since this is only 8 1/4. Now with this piece, I'm going to apply my adhesive to these 1/2 inch tabs, and I'm going to adhere this into the center of that piece and leave that 1/8 inch kind of gap at the top and the bottom. And this is going to be a large belly band. I can't remember if on the original album I actually put adhesive down the center to make it 2 pockets. I know I have 2 inserts in it, but I don't remember if it stops or if it goes all the way through. I didn't check that whenever I was looking at the construction. But if you wanted this to be 2 pockets so that your inserts can't slide all the way in, you would just put a line of adhesive down that before you put your piece on your page. Then the next 2 flaps are going to be 8 1/4 by 8 inches. I've scored these at a 1/2 inch on the 8 1/4 inch side on both of them, and I am going to just adhere these one on each side. So I'm going to be doing this, lining these up here, and again, these are a 1/4 inch smaller than this piece here. So if you want them to be the same size, you would put your 8 1/4 inch piece this way, and you would score on the 8 inch side, so these flaps will be a little bit smaller. Once those 2 flaps are on, we'll come back later to do the inserts. The last piece we need to put on, we have to open up all these flaps again and come to this inside piece here. Now this is 11 inches by 8 inches. I need to double check and make sure it will fit with both sides coming up, so it's good. On the 8 inch side, I've scored this at 1/2 inch, and I'm going to fold on this score line, and this is eventually going to be that deep pocket on the page. Now I did make this one a little bit smaller than the one on my original album because it was really hard to get that large insert out of my pocket, because I only left, I feel like there was a small gap there, so I made the gap a little bit bigger to make it hopefully a little bit easier to get out of my pocket here. So I'm going to just adhere this down to the center of my page, and again making sure that this piece does not go into that fold or that score line where the cover comes up. So for this one, I am going to bring up the bottom panel. Going to place this on my page and make sure that when this bottom panel is in place, it doesn't hit, and mine is good. So I'm going to go ahead and adhere this down. So there is our build for that, and I had a picture on the front of here, so that's why there weren't a lot of elements. on the front of this page. So remember, we're going to go in and build this up so you can still add some additional pockets or inserts or things like that. So it's not like this is it, but this is the main build for the page. We're going to flip this up here, and you notice we've got plenty of room to add our decorative papers and our photos. And then we're going to flip this one. So we've got some room in here still, which is good. This one's pretty thick with all that paper. So we'll see that our album is starting to lay a little bit flatter the more we start to close all these flaps up. And then I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to look from both sides, and it looks like everything looks good to me. So that is it for the base pages in this tutorial. Now, if you are planning on using a different paper collection, a non-Disney collection, you obviously do not have to follow the tutorial. Even if you're using a Disney paper, you don't have to follow the tutorial. But I am going to be building my album, adding different features. And you might not be using the same paper collection that I'm using, but I'm actually going to go through and show you or explain to you how I choose which papers, why I chose a certain paper here and a certain paper there, so you can see how I pick papers in my albums, because I know some people do ask me questions about that as well. I hope you will join me in the next video, so I will see you in the next tutorial.